Metroid Dread is almost here, so I've been on a quest to replay every mainline Metroid game before it hits, including Metroid Other M, which some might say is the true Metroid to Dread. Okay, look, I actually didn't hate the game when I first played it, unlike many. I thought it was okay and moved on with my life, and debated if it was even worth revisiting now, especially after recently making an entire video on whether or not it's actually canon, which, as I pointed out, doesn't even really matter because the events of that game haven't made a huge impact on the overall story. However, I decided to play it because of the remote possibility that Metroid Dread actually references something from that game, and also because I haven't played it in nearly a decade, and I was curious if my thoughts might have changed in the years since, whether for the better or the worse. So, did they? Let's find out as we revisit what might be the most controversial Metroid game in the series. Which is saying something. Metroid Other M is an interquel being set right after Super Metroid, focusing on a joint mission Samus took on with Galactic Federation soldiers, including her former CO Adam Malkovich, who has previously been mentioned in Metroid Fusion, which chronologically came later. The story doesn't just focus on the present mission, as it also delves deeper into Samus's past, more specifically, her relationship with Adam when she was part of the Galactic Federation. The much greater focus on story and narrative in Other M was something quite new to the Metroid franchise, even beyond the taste Metroid Prime 3 gave us a few years prior. In Other M, there are over 2 hours of fully voiced cutscenes, including Samus herself being voiced for basically the first time. This was all rather exciting when it was announced, offering a new spin on a time-tested series. We were about to take a closer look inside Samus's mind and backstory. We were going to finally meet Adam after only hearing about him in Fusion, and after the hot streak Metroid was on in the 2000s, there was no way Other M was going to disappoint, right? At this time, 3D Metroid games were limited to the Prime series, which were set almost entirely in the first person. Other M brought Metroid back to the third person thanks to developer Team Ninja, known for Dead or Alive and the 3D Ninja Gaidens. Because of this, Other M had not only a focus on narrative, but action as well. As amazing as the Metroid Prime games are, one disadvantage they had is how limited Samus's movements were. Her combat abilities were basically limited to strafing left and right while shooting. In Metroid Other M, she is fast and brutal, dodging attacks with grace while throwing and pinning creatures without mercy. Her absolute power is well demonstrated in this game, and it undoubtedly influenced her animations in Metroid Samus Returns and Dread. The game even takes a page out of the Prime book by including a first-person mode to aim missiles and look for clues in the environment. Metroid Other M has the makings of an ambitious action-adventure title. It's just a shame that it falls short in several areas, including the less-than-ideal controls. Perhaps because it was on the Wii, you just know it had to involve some kind of weird control scheme. In this case, Samus is controlled with a single Wii remote in the sideways position, moving with the D-pad, jumping with the 2 button, and shooting with 1, which is practically a throwback to the NES days. The camera even automatically follows the Samus, so there's no need to control it. While using a single Wii remote can feel awkward, the game is still designed with the control scheme in mind. Aiming from this perspective is automatic, so Samus locks onto the closest enemy as long as she's facing towards it. It's much better than trying to aim and move at the same time during hectic fights. But sometimes, you need a new perspective on life. Team Ninja knew this and implemented a switchable first-person mode. All it takes is to point the Wii remote at the TV. You can't move at all in this mode, but hey, it's the only way you can use the missiles. Remember when Samus could move while using missiles in the last few games? Yeah, she decided that wasn't important here. This is why missile expansions only increase the inventory by 1, because chances are you're not going to use them that much anyway. The first-person view is not used in combat much as it is for searching rooms to find secrets, and most of them are cleverly placed. Like this one room where a switch is found after draining 3 containers. Some are required to progress while others reward you with item pickups. Unfortunately, there are a few detective-like segments that lock Samus in this viewpoint in order to find a clue to progress. These are awful, as the clues are poorly placed and sometimes impossible to see. like this green fluid on green grass making you spend a ridiculous amount of time looking around. There's also a point where you have to look out a window, only it has to be on the exact pixel for a specific amount of time for it to register. Thankfully, these puzzles only appear a handful of times, but they're bound to make players so frustrated to the point of just giving up on the entire game, and I wouldn't blame them. The combat system sounds fairly straightforward, until you remember it's controlled by this. My hand actually cramped a few times. Playing a 3D game with a layout that resembles an NES controller just doesn't feel as good as using a control stick, even if the game is designed around that limitation. I mean, would you rather a 3D action game be designed around this? Or this? The limitations of the Wii Remote really stand out during combat, where dodging is activated by double tapping the D-pad. I mean, it works, but I hate it. Frankly, mapping the dodge button to the same button as movement makes me look like an idiot while recording footage. I kept taking little steps thinking it would activate a dodge, but it doesn't trigger until an enemy attack is about to land. Putting my ego to the side for a second, it really is an awkward setup. Honestly, Metroid Other M doesn't have the worst combat system I've played, but I can't help but think of how much better it would have felt on a normal controller. 3D action games like this are just better played with more than 3 buttons and awkward motion controls, like how you have to tilt the Wii Remote upwards while holding A to refill your missiles, as a result of there being no missile ammo pickups. Same goes for health, as the only way to refill it is to get to a save station or by tilting the Wii Remote and holding A when you're on your last energy tank. I'm aware that this shouldn't bother me as much as it does, but it bothers me. A lot. Now that enemies don't drop health and ammo, what's the point of killing them? I get if they're blocking progression, but when they're just taking up space in a room, I run past them. Why should I battle them if I get nothing in return? I understand that changing conventions in a well-established game series is important in order to keep things fresh and interesting, but this was not a wise design choice. It made the game feel less rewarding and more stressful during tough combat sections. Although, given the game's bigger focus on action, this change makes sense for players who want more of a challenge. The enemies Samus takes on are wild creatures subjected to bioweapon research. A lot of them are familiar enemies from other Metroid games, like the Zoomers and Zebesian space pirates. The newer creatures are bipedal, and they're designed more like action game enemies than Metroid ones. They're fast and deal a ton of damage. In spite of their brutality, their designs are rather forgettable, save for these organisms that look like Groot turned into a Brachiosaurus. These enemies left an impression on me due to their massive sizes and creative designs. I just wish they were in a better looking game. On the surface, Metroid Other M looks good for a Wii game, but when you compare it to Metroid Prime 3 that was released 3 years prior on the same console, it's a clear downgrade. Even Metroid Prime 1 and 2 look better than Other M. This is thanks to weak art direction and a frankly boring setting, that being a research station instead of a planet. The colors are dull, and I'm not just referring to the many gray rooms in this game, as even the colorful areas fail to create any striking visuals. Everything just looks muddy and uninspired, which is the opposite of what I expect from a Metroid game. The Prime games would literally show off how great their environments looked by having the camera pan around newly entered areas. And even the handheld 2D Metroids have some great visuals. Other M doesn't even try to replicate that sense of awe, as there aren't any huge areas on this small research station. Fusion was also set on a research station, but pulled it off way better, creating colorful and interesting biomes through its 16-bit graphics. Other M failed to create convincing backdrops that made it feel as if you were on a planet, not to mention the obscene amount of gray, metallic rooms, making it obvious you were on a man-made vessel the entire time. This vessel is called the Bottle Ship, and it includes 5 sectors. The main sector, which serves as an entrance and hub, Sector 1, the Biosphere, Sector 2, the Cryosphere, Sector 3, the Pyrosphere, and the final sector is a bioweapon research center. The first and last sectors are just typical man-made areas that lack personality, while sectors 1, 2, and 3 are replications of organic environments, like a jungle, a snowy region, and a volcanic region. Sure, they're not the most creative settings, but Metroid has always found a way to make the most basic environments enjoyable through great level design, along with memorable puzzles and bosses. Other M has some good ideas here, notably in where item pickups are placed. After defeating all the enemies in a room for the first time, the placement of an item is revealed on the map. It's up to you to figure out how to get it. Occasionally, you'll need to go into first-person mode to find the solution, which is a more creative use of this feature than during combat, as it reveals the secrets not shown by the third-person camera. Some of these puzzles are quite creative, like having to speed boost to a hole in the ground, because that's an indicator on when to shine spark jump to the ceiling, where you'll find an item pickup. There are a couple of new item pickups as well, such as one that decreases the charge beam time. Another is called an energy part, which will return in Metroid Dread. Collecting 4 of these will reward you with an energy tank. These new item pickups help diversify the lineup beyond just energy tanks and missile expansions, even though there is still a ton of the latter in Other M. Guess we Metroid fans will never escape being flooded with missile expansions. Given its name, Other M is a Metroidvania, but it doesn't feel as open as other Metroid games. Samus is mostly confined to hallways with few large rooms, making the overall map feel minuscule. That said, it still has the classic Metroidvania formula of acquiring new gear that'll get you past objects that block your path, which, in Other M's case, feels extremely linear. Though it's still possible to backtrack, the game doesn't encourage it, giving you waypoints to follow straightforwardly, unlocking Samus's gear as you progress. When you finish the story and watch the end credits, then you return to the station getting access to every room with all your acquired tools. However, getting the tools isn't fun nor rewarding, as Samus simply just activates whatever she needs when Adam authorizes it. Don't worry, I'll talk more about that in a bit, but this element takes the fun out of exploring. Instead of coming across a blockade and thinking, oh, I have to come back to this area when I acquire this tool, Adam just authorizes it right away. Fortunately, this doesn't apply for every tool, as some require finishing an objective to get, but the objectives are so simple that the reward doesn't feel earned. So while Other M is still technically a Metroidvania, it doesn't feel as rewarding due to the linear progression and not needing to actually find anything. As sad as the lack of good exploration is, does the selection of bosses at least live up to Metroid standards? Other M's collection is a mixed bag of new and old. The new ones consist of a giant clump of bugs, 2 angry caterpillars, a robot that moves shipping containers, and a Super Mario Galaxy alien. Some of these boss fights don't even feel like fights, as the first one is just used to demonstrate ice missiles, and another is practically a QuickTime event. Even the penultimate boss goes down in one hit after you attack the pretty weak aliens guarding it. The other new bosses pose somewhat of a challenge, but are extremely forgettable due to their generic visual designs and boring attack patterns. The most interesting bosses are the ones from previous Metroid games: Ridley, Nightmare, the Queen Metroid, and Phantoon. The Queen Metroid boss in particular is awesome, if only because of how it ends. At first, it's not clear how to attack the Queen, but it turns out you have to kill the Metroids it spawns first. Then you shoot the crystals on its head with some missiles until it eats you. That's when you unlock the power bomb and blow it to smithereens. This would have been an amazing final boss to end the game, but alas, that honor goes to Phantoon, and much like the rest of the boss battles in the game, this one's okay, requiring little beyond blocking projectiles and spamming charge shots and missiles until he goes down. Honestly, few bosses in Metroid Other M are particularly memorable, featuring basic attack patterns, uninspired designs, and hardly any creative uses of Samus's newly acquired gear. You know, for being a Metroid game, it seems that Other M does very little to be a Metroid game. It still has the key components of Metroid, such as acquiring new gear and backtracking, but focuses on being more of an action game than exploration. The game's environments are mostly based around tight corridors, and though some of the puzzles and item pickups are clever, they're more often stale and predictable. Other M's focus is on action, with Samus designed to be a fast and intimidating combat unit. But it doesn't do that particularly well either, with other games having better enemies, environments, and controls. Simply put, if Metroid Other M didn't have Metroid in the title, it would have been forgotten over time, as it doesn't do much to stand out within its genre and its series. Well, that last thing isn't particularly true, as Metroid Other M's story is the biggest reason why the game has a lasting legacy, and it's not exactly a positive one. Before we get into the story, however, I should elaborate that we are focusing on the English localization of the game, which is evidently quite a bit different from the original Japanese version. In order to get more context for this, I watched a video from Lexicon Lookout titled The Other M That Never Was. It's a great in-depth video detailing the differences between the Japanese version and English localization of the game, which changes the intent of some scenes. For example, in the Japanese version, Samus didn't want to be treated like a child and resented Adam for it, which sounds better than what English speakers got. There are a lot more differences than this, so I highly recommend checking out Lexicon's video after this one. For now, we'll remain focused on the English localization of Metroid Other M, while keeping in mind that the original Japanese version was better in some ways. The game's story follows Samus Aran during a mission on the Bottle Ship, a vessel that houses illegal bioweapons. She's not alone this time though, as she comes across a squad of Galactic Federation troops being led by her former CO Adam Malkovich. So while the story is set during a particular mission, it focuses a lot on Samus's past, her relationship with the other characters, and her internal struggles. This would have been a great character study for Samus had it been done correctly. For one, Samus does a lot of monologuing, which wouldn't be a bad thing if she didn't sound so monotone and disinterested, which a subpar script does not help with. She talks a lot about the baby Metroid that saved her life back in Super Metroid, which is understandable, but the game takes the baby theme and shoves it down the audience's throat. There's also blatant baby symbolism obnoxiously placed throughout the story. At the beginning, we see Samus as a baby in a womb for some reason, and not much later, she receives a distress signal codenamed Baby's Cry, which leads her to a vessel called the Bottle Ship. Get it? Like a baby's bottle? All of these baby references just make the story feel sappy, and it's hard to take seriously. Then there is the case of Adam, who is a character first mentioned in Metroid Fusion. There he was referred to as someone Samus could trust, someone who had respect and dignity for her. With that in mind, I don't know who the heck this guy is in Other M. Not only does Adam have a condition where he can't muster up as much as a smirk, but he treats Samus like crap the entire game. Part of that is resentment from her leaving the Galactic Federation, but even in flashbacks, he wasn't that much nicer, with the same ugly expression on his face and the personality of a burnt potato chip. His signature line, "Any objections, lady?" is supposed to be a dignified joke of sorts, but it just sounds cold and demeaning here. In fact, the Japanese version states that she actually didn't like being called something that made her seem weak, whereas the English localization had her appreciate being called something delicate, like a lady. A questionable decision made by the localization team, no doubt. However, Adam's biggest problem is the role he serves in the gameplay. Unlike other Metroid games, Samus is fully equipped with all her gear from beginning to end, but she can't use any of them until given explicit authorization by Adam. The first time I tried to use Morph Ball bombs, my heart sank when I read the notification that Adam had not yet authorized their usage. Adam, do you know who you're giving orders to? Someone who blew up planets by herself, and she's supposed to take orders from you? Sit down, old man. Unfortunately, Samus does not have this same mindset. Out of respect for Adam, she decides to follow his orders, even if that means burning alive in hot areas because he didn't authorize her to use the Varia function on her suit. Why did she have to wait for his orders? It's not like the Varia function would hurt anybody else, like a power bomb or missile would. The Samus we've known for 24 years at this point would not be so quick and eager to take orders from someone else. This interpretation of her feels more or less like a betrayal to her character, and it's made even more apparent when she encounters Ridley and has a panic attack. The long-standing feud between Ridley and Samus has gone on since the first game, as he's responsible for the death of Samus's parents. With that in mind, it's only natural that Samus might experience a PTSD-induced panic attack upon looking at her parents' killer, except this is literally the 7th time she's fought him. And this isn't even the original Ridley, it's a clone of him! I've heard some argue that Samus is having this panic attack because she believed she killed him for good back on Zebes in Super Metroid, but she's already killed him so many times before, only for him to come back somehow, so it really shouldn't be a surprise for her at this point. It's illogical and is bad writing that ignores Samus's history, but truthfully, this scene isn't as bad as I remember. It's worse, as I forgot that she was so panic-stricken by the sight of Ridley that her buddy Anthony had to save her.
Remember me?
No, Anthony, I don't! Stop asking me that! Look, there is nothing wrong with Samus having PTSD at all, but it should be coherent with her backstory. Her life has been nothing but traumatic after all, so PTSD isn't out of the cards, but her having a PTSD-induced anxiety attack in response to a villain she's already beaten multiple times seems to evade logic. And then requiring her to be saved by a man is insulting and borderline sexist. And it's not even the most sexist part of the game. Her relationship with Adam is entirely submissive, and she rarely has anything bad to say about him. The Japanese version of the game shows her at least being critical of his judgment and the words he uses to describe her. In English, it's almost nothing but admiration for what's a crappy dude. There is one instance where she suspects Adam is a traitor, and she needs to activate her space jump to get across a large gap, so she turns them on and flippantly asks,
"Any objections, Adam?"
That's great, Samus. Now where was that attitude during, the entire game? The scene that follows has Adam explaining what's been going on at the station, involving a Metroid cloning program, a rogue AI modeled after the evil Mother Brain, you know how it goes. How does Adam explain this to her? By literally shooting her in the back, thus stunning her, and putting her once again in another weak and submissive position. Adam then breaks off a sector of the ship housing the cloned Metroids, sacrificing himself in the process. This could have been an emotional and heroic moment had he been a better written character in a better written story with a better written protagonist. This leads to my final point on Metroid Other M, being that it's largely inconsequential to the timeline. The only thing of importance that happens in it is Adam's death. And given that Metroid Fusion never specified when he died, it literally could have happened at any point. The events of Other M aren't brought up again in Fusion. Could they return in Dread? Possibly, but if they aren't, then there is no point in playing the game for the story. Despite its poor story, Metroid Other M could have been saved by its gameplay. Unfortunately, the game that accompanies this story is a generic action game with awkward controls, a boring setting, and forgettable enemies. It has some good ideas here and there, namely with the first-person puzzles, but they're bogged down by an uninspired setting and awkward controls. The one thing I at least have to give the game credit for is its ambition. It's clear from the start that director Yoshio Sakamoto and the developers at Team Ninja wanted to make a unique Metroid experience. One that had the signature Metroidvania gameplay with a bigger emphasis on action and storytelling. I remember watching the trailers for this game and getting excited for a new kind of Metroid game that focused on story, with gorgeous animated cutscenes and feature-length voice acting. If the Metroid series wanted to try something like this again, I wouldn't mind as long as they addressed the shortcomings of Other M. Write a better story, give better voice direction, but most importantly, don't forget about what makes Metroid, Metroid. Other M did the bare minimum of what a Metroid game is supposed to do, offering limited exploration and making the gadgets you're supposed to find just there to activate when the story calls for it. Putting it plainly, standing on its own, Other M is mediocre, but as a Metroid game, it's bad, and I didn't like it. I'm glad I gave it one more chance this year, but I have no desire to play it again, and it won't be a part of any of my series playthroughs in the future. Anyway, I'm genuinely curious. How do you feel about Metroid Other M? Do you like it? Hate it? A bit of both? Let me know in the comments below, and check out the videos on the right for more topics you might be interested in. Until next time, bye.